Here we go again, honeys. It's Tuesday, and that means it is Beesness time, a recap of all the most noteworthy arts world headlines from September 21st through the 27th, as picked by yours truly. One quick reminder before we get to the good stuff here, we have dropped already this month's 5-minute musical on our Patreon. Head on over there to catch our music video recap focused this month on a 2015 Rihanna banger whose music video features one of the most famous villains of all time, and which had a surprising impact on the feminist discussions of the mid-2010s. We'll also give you a quick reminder that our sources for today are linked in our source document, which is part of your episode description there. And now let's begin. Follow-ups first. Last week, an Estonian museum director was sentenced to Russian prison for anti-Putin banners. Citing the exiled news outlet Media Zona, a report in the Moscow Times says Maria Smorzhevsik-Smirnova, the director of the Narva Museum in Estonia, was sentenced to 10 years in absentia on September 25th on charges of disseminating quote-unquote war fakes and quote rehabilitating Nazism end quote related to her hanging of banners from a wall of the Narva castle that labeled Russian President Vladimir Putin a quote-unquote war criminal. Smorzhevsik-Smirnova has allegedly been hanging similarly themed banners since 2023 from that wall, especially on Russian Victory Day, which commemorates the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. She had called her designation on the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs' wanted list earlier this year a, quote, great honor, end quote. According to ERR News, part of the Estonian public broadcasting company, Smorzhevsik-Smirnova said, quote, I've not committed a single illegal act in my life. How my actions are interpreted by the totalitarian regime of a neighboring country is their internal matter. I see what has happened as yet another, rather banal and long since unoriginal attempt to intimidate me personally and also others, those who dare call things by their proper names, end quote. And mic drop. And in a bit of much needed good news, Trump's so-called gender ideology ban for arts grants was ruled unconstitutional by a federal court last week. Judge William Smith of the United States District Court in Rhode Island ruled on September 19th that the National Endowment for the Arts' consideration of whether an applicant might use its grant money to, quote, promote gender ideology, end quote, violated freedom of expression protections because it imposed a, quote, viewpoint-based restriction on private speech, end quote. Smith wrote it is, quote, presumptively unconstitutional, end quote, that the NEA would be less likely to award funds to organizations it deemed to violate that ban. Judge Smith pointed out in his ruling that the 1965 law, which created the endowment, specified that grants be awarded on merit alone. He also decided that the addition of the NEA's quote-unquote gender ideology criteria per the Trump executive order bypassed congressional authority as stipulated by the Administrative Procedure Act. The why we care about this headline is, of course, the decision ends a months-long First Amendment challenge, which was filed in March of this year by the ACLU and its Rhode Island chapter, representing a cohort of 4 prospective NEA applicants that were seeking funding for trans and LGBTQ plus affirming projects. ACLU senior staff attorney Vera Edelman, who litigates free speech cases for the civil rights organization, called the ruling a, quote, resounding victory, end quote. So what happens now, you ask? Well, the NEA has not responded to requests for comment, nor have they filed for an appeal of the decision, but they still might do the second. But we will see whether or not the NEA will truly consider quote-unquote gender ideology with this recent court ruling when the decisions for fiscal year 2026 grants are released in November. Last week was also a big one for another F, financials, more specifically sales. We learned that a world-class collection of old masters paintings could be offered on the public stock exchange. The billionaire investor with a particularly notable collection of said old masters by the name of Thomas S. Kaplan has decided to quote-unquote fractionalize the lead-in collection because his children had, quote, no interest in material objects and, quote, no idea what to do with all the art, end quote. The lead-in collection features key works by Dutch and Flemish old masters, including one of 3 dozen paintings by Johannes Vermeer in existence, and they're regularly loaned out to be the headliners of blockbuster exhibitions. The collection's monetary value has never been publicly reported. Kaplan said in an interview with the art newspaper, quote, to my mind, the best way to evangelize for Rembrandt is by giving millions, maybe tens of millions, of ordinary people the opportunity to own a Rembrandt, end quote. It's still unclear at this time what exactly fractionalizing means here, but we know that it's unlikely to include NFTs as the name suggests. The term, after all, could be seen as a reference to the early 2020s fad. Another announcement And of note, Picasso's Bust de Femme is set to auction for upwards of $11 million US. That is the high estimate, at least, for the 1944 Pablo Picasso painting, a portrait of fellow artist and lover Dora Maar. At a speculated $13.6 million value, it is, according to Art News, quote, by far the highest priced on offer during the September sales in Hong Kong across the 3 major auction houses this week, unquote. What was interesting to me, honeys, about this reporting is that most of the interest seems to lie in the subject, Dora Maar, even if that price tag is being boosted by the Picasso name. Hyperallergic reports that the excitement is rising because it is, quote, one of the largest portraits of Maar to come to auction in recent years, unquote, after 25 years of being held in private collections. We also heard about a Frida Kahlo painting that could shatter auction records 4 years after a Kahlo's self-portrait became the most expensive work by a Latin American artist at just under $35 million. Another work titled The Dream or The Bed from 1940 could set a new one this November at Sotheby's in New York City with an estimate of $40 to $60 million US. This artwork, which was created the same year that Kahlo remarried fellow artist Diego Rivera after he had an affair with her sister, portrays the artist tucked into the lower of 2 bunk beds and wrapped in green vines, with a skeleton in a mirroring position wrapped in explosives up top. Not only is this exciting news for Kahlo fans, but the results could set a new record for a work by any ethnicity of woman artist at auction, a title which is currently held by Georgia O'Keeffe's Jimson Weed / White Flower No. 1, which sold for $44 million in 2014. We heard last week that LA's oldest gallery is set to close and donate their archive to Huntington Library. LA Louvre, founded in the Venice neighborhood in 1975 by Peter and Elizabeth Gold, has decided to pivot to private art dealing, consultation, and projects, and provide further artist support amid changing market and local conditions. They will no longer offer public programming, but will donate their archives and library containing documentation of more than 50 years of contemporary art in Southern California to the Huntington in San Marino. That documentation features, quote, correspondence, exhibition records, photographs, publications, and ephemera related to artists including David Hockney, Alison Saar, Gajin Fujita, Leon Kossoff, and R.B. Kitaj, end quote. All the materials will be handed over by 2029. What we noticed about this story, honeys, is that there does not seem to be a total loss of public arts programming with this transition, but rather just a change in the type or provision circumstances of the public access. Says Peter Gold, quote, we strongly feel the institution's stewardship of the LA Louvre Archive and Library will aid in telling our story and Los Angeles' story for generations to come, end quote. We also learned of a notable spat over 3 loaned Banksy artworks. According to a report in The Guardian, John Brandler, a British specialist in street art, loaned the works in question 3 years ago to Metamorphosi, a Rome-based enterprise that presents touring exhibitions for shows in Italy and Switzerland, but is still waiting on overdue loan payments as well as the return of the pieces. In short, honeys, the girls are fighting. The works in question here are 2018's Season's Greetings, which features a little boy sticking out his tongue to eat polluted snow, Heart Boy, which depicts a boy painting a pink heart, and one called Computer Robot. Brandler also told The Guardian that the contract was originally for 2 years, but the loan deal was extended with a monthly fee, which Metamorphosi allegedly almost immediately stopped paying on time and are 4 months in arrears on. He pointed out that another London-based Banksy dealer, Akoris Ndipa, has been owed £45,000 or around $61,000 for curatorial services for them for more than 2 years. Metamorphosi, of course, defended themselves in their own statements. They said they tried to return the murals in June, at which point Brandler told them that the company could keep the works until October due to his own storage issues. They claimed they are still waiting on final invoices from Brandler, dismissed Ndipa's claim, and made claims themselves that they will be returning the works by the end of September. We'll let you know if that happens or not. Another UK story for you all, their Customs and Revenue Office has been doubling down on money laundering. The latest round of fines, covering October 1st, 2024 to March 31st, 2025, were published by the organization on July 10th, but came to our attention this week because they indicate so-called art market participants are increasingly being issued penalties for operational compliance violations as opposed to simple registration failures. An example provided by our sources is DYS44 Art Gallery Limited, which was ordered to pay over £158,000 or over $213,000 for a multitude of procedural failures as opposed to any engagement in illegal activity like money laundering. Rena Neville, director of AML consultancy Corinth Consulting, noted a sharp uptick uptick in enforcement numbers overall, saying, quote, over 80 penalties were issued in this 6-month window compared to 61 across the previous 20 months, end quote, while our sources noted that the fine amounts have been increasing since early 2024. Yet in spite of this cracking down, questions of anti-money laundering effectiveness are still being asked and lingering. Director General of the Society of London Art Dealers, Paul Hewitt, is among several to raise concerns that some of these penalties, especially for technical breaches, appear more bureaucratic than meaningful. Last week, however, also saw new reports exposing the global toll of censorship. The latest data from these two major arts reports should be cause for alarm for all those who consider the arts the canary in the coal mine for surveillance and censorship. Taken together, they indicate that 70% of the world's population has experienced a decline in their expressive freedom over the last decade, with 5.2 billion people living in quote-unquote crisis or quote-unquote highly restricted conditions. These numbers come from the 2025 Global Expression Report, or GXR, published in June by the British advocacy organization Article 19, which quantitatively measures freedom of speech on an international scale, as well as the 2025 State of Artistic Freedom Report by the nonprofit FreeMuse. Hyperallergic writes, quote, of the 161 countries studied by the GXR across 25 indicators from media and internet freedoms to civil society rights and cultural expression, only 35, representing 15% of the global population, remain in quote-unquote open conditions, meaning environments where freedom of expression is generally safeguarded and encouraged, end quote. For a digestible human scale, think of it this way. For every one person who gained expressive freedom in the last decade, 19 others lost it. Meanwhile, the state report, quote, documents the censorship, imprisonment, and harassment of artists across regions, including in ostensibly democratic nations such as the United States, end quote. It recounted testimonies of persecuted and repressed artists, including stories from 16 artists imprisoned in Cuba, tortured Georgian artists, and of art exhibitions banned in Turkey due to anti-LGBTQ plus vitriol. An additionally notable fact, Artists at Risk Connection, PEN America, and the Association of Art Museum Directors reported earlier this year that 65% of art museum directors have experienced pressure not to show an artwork or exhibition at least once. The Why We Care is best put by Article 19 Executive Director Quinn McHugh, who warns we must, quote, work harder and faster to reverse before it is too late, and it really is later than we think, end quote. Meanwhile, Sarah Wyatt, FreeMuse's research director, in an email to our sources, focused on a, quote, creeping climate of self-censorship, far harder to detect but equally corrosive, end quote, which she sees as the result of these global attacks on artistic freedom. For that reason, she says, reports like these are key to understanding via data which free expression indicators come under fiercest attack, when and where, and how much of censorship is state-imposed versus self-imposed, though often from fear of political retaliation. The art world also got wind last week that art students at Damascus University studying in sculpture, painting, engraving, and printmaking departments were told that a 1974 rule prohibiting the use of nude models would be strictly enforced as of August, with the penalty being a 0 out of 100 failing grade. The directive was issued by Fouad Dadao, the fine arts dean and a professor at the university since 1993. He claimed, quote, graduation projects must conform to ethical and society values, end quote. Damascus University art students immediately pushed back against the ban. One statement issued by a university student group called it, quote, a clear violation of academic freedom, an infringement on the independence of curricula, and a distortion of the structure of the educational process itself, end quote. The statement also highlighted the long and crucial history of figure drawing skills practiced via nudes by artists in training in the classroom, and ended with a demand that the Syrian Ministry of Education affirm its commitment to academic freedom and a call for a peaceful protest later that month. It's unclear if that protest actually materialized based on our sources' reporting. All the same, this policy has generated spirited debate in Syria, where it's been viewed as a political move, according to the National, which also pointed out Dadao's hypocrisy in this decision. Quote, Dadao, a practicing artist, has made several artworks depicting nude figures, end quote, two of which will be featured in an online exhibition called Erotica later this year by the London-based Lighthouse Gallery. Another headline catching our attention last week was that the Chicago Architecture Biennale lost participants over its sponsors' ties. The Architects newspaper reports that a group of 21 participants, or about a fifth of the total, sent an open letter to the Biennale's organizers a day ahead of the event's September 18th opening, announcing their withdrawal over the Biennale supporter for Crown Family Philanthropies' 10% stake in General Dynamics, a munitions maker whose weapons have been used in Israel's occupation of Gaza. 9 have actually followed through. That letter reads in part, quote, "We believe that the aforementioned sponsorship is incompatible with the values of our work as well as with the event's stated mission of addressing, quote, architecture's role in shaping our collective future, end inner quote, and pursuing, quote, radical change," end all quotes. Biennale's officials replied to an August 14th letter introducing the participants' concerns that they intended to use the Crown family funding for educational purposes, not for exhibition support, but the organization has not yet issued a public response to the new letter nor the dropouts. Another headline announced a new data co-op and asked if they could change how we preserve digital art. New media art dealer Kalani Nicole launched the Transfer Data Trust, a data cooperative aiming to make art last 100 years per its own ads, at an event during the Armory show earlier this month. The Why It Matters, honeys, is that the trust is an example of the different ways that people are trying to differentiate the data behind digital media, which can become pulled together for these works that really possess, quote, no history, no mode of production, no distinct genres, and in short, no material culture of their own, end quote, and of how to assign real value to art data when it's binary codes, when it's ones and zeros behind the scenes. This project already has support from some pretty big names: Gray Area Gallery, the Knight Foundation, other art and tech institutional sponsors. But what remains to be seen is if these technical solutions to preservation will translate to wide buy-in to the program and consistent sales of artworks from it. Explicit language warning for the name that I'm about to drop. The last week also saw Judy Chicago and Pussy Riot's Nadia Tolokonnikova face calls to cancel their Tel Aviv show. Over 50 artists and performers, many of them Israeli, have signed a letter calling on both artists to withdraw Chicago's exhibition on view at the Tel Aviv Museum of Art in protest of Israel's genocide in Gaza. The exhibition is really only of one artwork, a collaborative quilt composed of reflections written by women around the globe, co-created by Chicago and Tolokonnikova in 2022. The latter has said she agrees with the letter's signatories, but, quote, does not have any control over ongoing logistics or where it is shown, end quote. A spokesperson for the Tel Aviv Museum told our sources that the quilt was loaned by the New York art technology cultural firm D. Minty, not directly by the artist. Those signatories do include video artist Guy Ben Nair, photographer Eldad Rafiali, painter Yoram Kumpermans, and anti-war activist and music composer Ilan Volkov, who was recently arrested for protesting near the Gaza border. It reads in part, quote, presenting art that speaks of social justice issues in a country that is in the midst of committing a genocide allows this country to build a facade of progressivism and utilize your art and reputation to whitewash its crimes, end quote. Some especially were pissed off at Chicago because of her history of feminism. And the signatories are not alone. The art newspaper contributors themselves wrote, quote, according to a UN women's analysis from 19th of May 2025, more than 28,000 women and girls have been killed in Gaza since October 2023. To speak about feminism within an institution of a state that perpetrates such atrocities while ignoring them is hypocrisy, end quote. The director of the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, Tanya Cohen-Uzieli, rejected calls for a cultural boycott, however, and said, quote, to cancel this project now would not be an act of solidarity but of surrender. It would only strengthen the very structures of power, violence, and silencing. The Tel Aviv Museum of Art is led by women and has consistently championed the work of women artists across generations, cultures, and identities, including Palestinian artists, end quote. We will see if Chicago eventually caves to pressure. On a more tragic note, a 61-year-old man, identified as Joseph Keegan of Parsippany, New Jersey, was accidentally killed on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. last week while delivery crews were unloading a 1979 BMW race car that had been painted by Andy Warhol ahead of the annual Cars at the Capitol exhibition. He was reportedly pinned down by the vehicle due to a winch malfunction. Medics attempted to treat him on the scene, but eventually pronounced him dead, and the event, showcasing cars from the National Historic Vehicle Register, which was scheduled to begin on September 17th and run through September 23rd, has been canceled, according to a Facebook announcement. The exhibition's spokespeople said, quote, our sincere and heartfelt condolences go out to the deceased's family. Out of respect for the deceased, we will not comment further at this time, end quote. We also heard last week that hundreds of Machu Picchu tourists were left stranded during protests by local residents of the Cusco region of Peru. The residents are protesting the replacement of tourist bus operator Concetter, which for 30 years held the contract to take tourists from the nearby local town Aguascalientes pathways to the entrance of the Inca citadel, with Peru Rail and other local bus tourism companies hired by local districts. Peru's tourism minister, Desilu Leon, told local radio that 1,400 tourists were evacuated on September 15th, or Monday, and 900 more were stranded in Aguascalientes the following day. Peru Rail explained that service was suspended on Tuesday as the route was blocked by, quote, rocks of various sizes, end quote. A local unit of the company also reported that part of its rail had been excavated by so-called third parties, putting the integrity of the track at risk. The U.S. Embassy of Peru put out an advisory statement after, as 14 people were reportedly injured in the protests, that, quote, travelers with rail travel plans should get in contact with their rail service provider directly regarding rescheduling or reimbursement and adjust their plans accordingly. Another neat headline from the last week: 30 years of research encapsulated in a new book published by the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland has revealed the existence of a previously unknown castle on the Scottish Isle of Islay dating to the 12th or 13th century CE. The book is the culmination, basically, of major archaeological research that was conducted on the island from 1989 to 1998, and interpretations then of that research by experts in the decades since. Their findings reveal that the site of Finlaggan was a center of power during the Lordship of the Isles, an independent kingdom covering Argyll, Islay, Bute, the Isle of Man, Skye, Ross, Niod, Knodiart, Ardnamurchan, and the Kintyre Peninsula, whose title was mostly held by members of Clan Donald until 1493. And our last story for the day, honeys: treasures were recovered from the Titanic's sister ship, the Britannica, which sunk near Greece in 1916. The Britannica gained notoriety of its own when it sank off the coast while working as a hospital ship in 1916, 4 years after the Titanic went down. After it struck a mine, it sank with 30 of the 1,060 people on board. Our sources say that the Culture Ministry of Greece said a team of 11 divers brought back several artifacts from 400 feet down on the ocean floor during a week-long mission back in May. They included the Britannic's lookout bell, silver-plated trays from the ship's first-class luxury service, ceramic tiles from a Turkish bath, among others. These objects are currently undergoing conservation work and will be included in the permanent collection of a museum of underwater antiquities being built at the Greek port of Piraeus and currently scheduled to open in 2026. And a small side note win for the humanities: the funding for that upcoming museum includes 93 million euros, or around 109 US million, from the European Union's Recovery and Resilience Fund. There's your news, there's your business. Hope you are happy with the updates. As always, we welcome your feedback anywhere you're happy to give it, whether that be Instagram, Substack, Patreon, whatever. We'll catch you honeys soon, and until then, take care and hydrate or dihydrate. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.